So we are coming to the very end of 2024. This is actually going to be our last Tech Tip Tuesday video of the year, just because we're getting into the holiday season. You've got things with family and friends. Your focus should be on them, not on your business. So last video of 2024, we will pick up on January 7th with brand new Tech Tip Tuesday videos. I've got lots of big plans for 2025. But to kind of round out the year, I thought I would share with you some trends that I have seen in quilt pattern writing. As a tech editor and ghostwriter, I kind of get to see the leading edge of a lot of these things. Often I am the first person to see a pattern before it gets sent anywhere, frequently before testers, before anyone else gets to see it. So it's kind of like a sneak peek into what's going to be coming out. And I get to pick up on some patterns, some trends, themes that come in and out of the quilt pattern kind of world. Often these things will kind of go in waves. Somebody will design something and other people get inspired of it. And so it just kind of bounces through the community. And so you'll start to pick up on trends and patterns. And I get to see a lot of that as a tech editor. And so today I'm going to talk about one of those trends that I think is going to be really, really big in 2025. You've heard of stitch and flip squares or stitch and flip triangles, snowballs. These go by a lot of different names, but basically it's where you would take a square, you'd mark the diagonal, align it to one corner of a square or a rectangle or whatever kind of shape you're trying to put this triangle onto. You'll stitch on that line, cut off the excess, and then flip it open to get this kind of perfectly aligned triangle on the corner. It's a super popular technique. I see it in a ton of quilt patterns. It's very, very traditional, been around for a while, very easy technique, and there's no trimming or weird cutting required because you basically just cut your square the exact size of the piece that you want in unfinished dimensions, and then you don't have to do any trimming or squaring up at the end. It just flips open and it's perfect and ready to go. That's not the technique we're talking about today, though. The one that I think is going to be really big in 2025 is a variation of that technique that's been around for a while, but it kind of goes in and out of popularity. And I've seen a little bit of an uptick in popularity so far. I've seen a handful of patterns that have started using this technique, and I think it's really going to blow up in 2025. And that is the stitch and flip rectangles technique. So it works just like stitch and flip squares, only there's some nuances to how you have to kind of orient this rectangle because now you start to get like right-handedness and left-handedness into your pieces, similar to like what you get with half rectangle triangles, which are a very similar technique. Basically, you just take your rectangle, you draw on that diagonal, right, align it, stitch in the diagonal, trim away the excess, and then flip open. But instead of having a 45-degree triangle that would come from a square, you now have some other angle, and it can be any angle you want, kind of slapped onto the corner of whatever base piece you're working with. There's some nuances to the math that you have to worry about with this stuff. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but I first want to just kind of go through the technique and show you how it works because it's fairly straightforward, even if it looks a little bit intimidating at first. Alrighty, let's talk through this technique. So just like with the stitch and flip triangle squares method, you're going to start with kind of a base piece, and then you're going to have your rectangle that you're going to add onto it. And what you see there is me just indicating that I want to basically leave that lower triangle on there, and I want my diagonal line going that way across my piece. Now, I could have rotated this piece so that we had, long ways going this way. That would work just the same way. You just got to keep track of what orientation you want. Alrighty, so I'm going to take that piece, and what I need to do is just mark that diagonal. And in this particular instance, because this is a solid, I didn't actually invert my piece. That's what you would want to do if you were working with prints. You'd want to have the wrong side facing up for you now. And then you actually want to mark the opposite diagonal to the direction you want the triangle going in the end. So we're going to actually mark this diagonal, not that one. Does that make sense? Has to do with this kind of right-handed and left-handedness. Alrighty, so you're going to just see me take my ruler. We're going to mark diagonal to diagonal. We don't need to worry about the angles here. We just need to make sure that we've got our corners aligned along that diagonal. And then I'm just going to take a little friction pen here and mark that diagonal. Not too difficult. All right, so because I'm going to be putting the stitch and flip triangle onto a square here that is bigger than the dimensions of my pieces, I need to actually mark my alignment points here. This is really important because without having the points that you need to align to, there's a million different orientations you could put this kind of rectangle in alignment to while still having the ends touching those sides of the square. But the key here is that only one of them is actually going to end up giving you a corner that's 90 degrees, right? A complete square in the end, which is what we want. If you don't get the alignment correct, you're gonna have that kind of corner tilted wonky a little bit. So marking here is really important. So once we've kind of gotten things marked, I'm just gonna bring that marked rectangle that I have and just align the ends of those marked lines to the little marks on my purple square that I made earlier. Again, this is to ensure that we get a 90-degree triangle when we flip this thing open. Alignment's really important here. The better you align it, the better the piece is gonna look in the end. And then I'm just pinning this thing down so that it stays in place as I go to stitch that line. All right, now that I've got it stitched, I'm just gonna trim that seam allowance down. I'm just kind of trimming it to approximately 1/4 inch. You could, of course, do this with a ruler, and then you can kind of get a sneak peek of what you're gonna see. Alrighty, so once we press that, and of course you can press to the side, you can press open, do whatever you want, just realize that kind of on the very last little pieces here, you're gonna have some funky looking dog ears that aren't completely 1/4 inch just because of the angles we're working with. That's totally fine. Those will usually get sewn in and sewn up when you take in your 1/4 inch seam allowances when you sew this piece into its final resting spot. But just be aware that that's gonna look a little wonky. It might throw some people off. But basically, depending on how well you align this thing, you're gonna get a complete square, a 90-degree triangle in that bottom corner, even though you kind of started with this wonky angle. Now, I started with a 4x3 rectangle that is unfinished sizes, very important, but you can see our alignment is 4 inches up and 3 inches in, just like we expected. This technique, just like the stitch and flip squares, shouldn't really require any trimming, but if you are really gearing it towards beginners, you may want to add in a note that if something looks wonky, just go ahead and square up. If you look closely over here, you can see we've got a little sliver of a gap here. That's just me not having everything cut perfectly, everything aligned perfectly when I sewed everything. That's okay. That's like what, less than a 1/16 of an inch? It's not going to be a problem, right? And you have this problem with stitch and flip squares as well. People just don't usually worry about it too much. Alrighty, now worth noting is that when you have kind of a rectangle that's going on a strip where the stitch and flip rectangle is going to hit both edges of that strip. It's going to intersect those things instead of just kind of floating in the middle of a side. You actually don't have to do that marking, and that's because you already have some landmarks built in. And so what I'm showing here is a 4x3 rectangle and a 5x3 rectangle that I'm going to stitch and flip onto the corner of this strip. And because it's a strip, I've got one of those pieces intersecting in the corner and the other one in the middle of a side. All I have to do is just rotate this thing until my corners are touching corner and side. There's only one way that this fits because of the length of that diagonal, which is fixed. And so you don't actually have to go to the bother of doing the marking that we talked about in the previous example. And so here is what you get when you sew both of those triangles on. You can see they're at 2 different angles, but if we kind of went through and measured this like we did in the previous one, you would see that is equal to the original strip size, which is exactly what we want. So that's the technique. That's how you actually do it. Let's talk a little bit about some guidelines and some quilt math considerations that you need to keep in mind if you're going to include this technique in your pattern. So first things first is that your quilt math is just the unfinished size of the corner you want to cover. So if you're trying to put a 1x2 rectangle on the corner of some base piece, you need to, of course, increase that to your unfinished size. So it would be 2.5 by 1.5. And that's going to be the size of the rectangle you're cutting there. And it's also going to be the dimensions that you're going to mark in on your corner. Now, again, I could switch this. I could make it long ways this way, short ways that way. That'd be totally fine. We just need to make sure that we are marking the correct diagonal depending on the orientation that we want. And so that's what you see here is that basically if you want it aligned so that you're cutting off that corner and filling it in with a different fabric, we want to just mark the opposite diagonal. So intuition would tell you you're marking this way. You just need to remember that you're always going to do the opposite. So the correct diagonal to mark to get that geometry was actually going kind of from bottom left to top right. And so that's something to keep in mind too. As with HRTs, you're going to get a lot of kind of left-handedness, right-handedness that you have to deal with. These are things you don't even have to worry about when you're talking about squares because each dimension is already equal. It doesn't matter. There is no right and left. Everything's equal. But with rectangles, you have to worry about that, right? So if you're putting a stitch and flip rectangle on the bottom left and the bottom right, you're going to be marking opposite diagonals on those pieces. And so half of them you've got to mark from bottom left to top right, and the other half you have to mark from top left to bottom right. Does that make sense? Same thing with HRTs. It's just another added layer of complexity that you have to think about when you're kind of building this into a quilt pattern. Number 2, rectangles are always going to need to be twisted. You never ever want to be aligning kind of corner to corner. You always have to kind of do this twisting. And if you've marked the correct diagonal, it should force you to do that. There's no way to kind of get the diagonal you've marked aligned right sides together if you've marked the correct diagonal. Again, HRTs work the same way, but it's just another kind of thing that you have to think about when you're writing a pattern, and this trips a lot of people up. Number 3, we kind of already touched on, and that's if you're snowballing the whole strip width. So one of your kind of stitch and flip rectangles is going to intersect a corner, and the other one is going to intersect a side. You don't have to mark those alignment points. But if you're not doing that, right, so you're stitch and flipping a corner where both ends of your rectangle are just kind of intersecting in the middle of a side somewhere, you have to include some marking instructions and dimensions on that corner in order to make sure you get your alignment right. Because there are many, many ways that you can align that diagonal that you've marked that would still intersect those two sides, but only one of them is actually going to result in that 90-degree corner that we're looking for. Really, really important that you include those marking instructions, even if it seems like you can kind of just do it freehand and hope for the best. It's not going to work out. You have to include marking instructions. Number 4 is to expect that you might need to do some squaring up. As with stitch and flip squares, stitch and flip rectangles can be tricky to align just because depending on how close you are to that kind of true diagonal and how well you do with your alignment, sometimes things get a little bit wonky. Again, this isn't all that different from stitch and flip squares, but it's just another layer of complexity to think about. With this technique, if you've done your math correctly, you really shouldn't need to trim, but that's kind of an idealized world, right? So including a note saying trim to square up as necessary or something along those lines, indicating that it may be necessary, but it's not required, can be a helpful step to just make sure that everybody's kind of getting those little quirks and things trimmed off before they start like sewing blocks together and compounding those little misalignments, right? Now, I just want to say that this technique is a little bit more advanced. I would put it on a similar level to HRTs, maybe a little easier because HRT trimming is fairly tricky. We don't have to deal with that here, but there's still some nuances to it. The other thing to remember is that this is going to be a brand new technique for the vast majority of your customers. It's not a common technique at all. And so anytime you've got something unfamiliar, even if it's not difficult, it can still kind of up the difficulty level for your pattern just because things that are more familiar are easier. It's just how things work. So this is definitely not something to throw into a beginner pattern, in my opinion. You may want to just kind of disclaim this on your quilt pattern cover and just let people know that there is a little bit of a wonky technique in here. Nothing difficult, right? This is really just a stitch and flip corner that everybody's used to, just with a couple of tweaks, but that unfamiliarity can really be intimidating to a lot of people. Alrighty, I hope you found that helpful. I think this technique's going to be really big in 2025. A couple of years back, HRTs were like all the rage. They were in all of the new modern quilt patterns. I think that's going to be this technique this year. So go ahead and play around with it and see if it really transforms your designs. Alrighty, have a fabulous holiday season and a happy new year. And I will see you January 7th for Tech Tip Tuesday. See ya.